Live streaming test 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My goodness, I've got some great news for you. Jason, what did you do? You haven't had a haircut in a long time. I see that. I haven't seen you in a long time, like a long time, probably like last summer or something. I'll hang. All right. So let's just do a quick quorum check to see how we're doing there. Let me see.
Okay, I have the list here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Councillor Dudas.
Here.
Add Councillor Sharali. Councillor Turney.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Here.
Councillor Brockington is here. Councillor DeRuz. Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Meehan. Councillor Hoopley.
Here.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Myself and the chairs here, so we have quorum, I believe.
And Libby Luloff is in the room too. Yeah.
Okay, I see Councillor Meehan just.
And Councillor Meehan's here now? Great. So I don't have it at the motion yet, but I wanted to tell you that I've heard from a few of you, and Councillor and Chair Al Shantiri and I have been talking, and I've been talking with staff. We've got a lot of people. I think that we've had excellent presentations today across the board. Very, very interesting. We all know how important this is to our city. And I remind you, we were supposed to do this in December. So anybody that doesn't remember that, it was supposed to be before us in December, and the Algonquins of Ontario asked us to delay it. And then they were the first ones to speak today. So hey, John. So here's what we're thinking. We looked at, first of all, some silly people thought that maybe Friday would be a good day, and that's the day before the long weekend, and we really enjoy that. Even if we can do nothing, go nowhere, talk to nobody, give no one a hug, have no kind of fun, but other than that, it's still a long weekend. And then we looked at tomorrow, but no, because that's not fair to the people that have signed up today. I really believe that have put today on hold, and so I really, I hate the thoughts of even disappointing them. So we thought that next Wednesday, which is the 20th, it was supposed to be a transit commission meeting that we use that day. We start at 9. We thought that tonight we could go through another 30, because we still have 70 people wanting to speak to us right now. So if we went through another 30, that still probably will take us beyond 9 o'clock at the rate we're going. But it would give us time. Staff could really have time to, well, they were ready for the questions anyways, but the motions and things like that. Give us time to have, be ready for that. Give some thought to it. Listen to some more, another 49. We're not adding anybody to the list. Where you were is where you are, starting at 9 o'clock on Wednesday the 20th. The other thing I checked is that it still will go from the 20th to the 27th at council. So it still fits in the same timeline, which, as you know, we have a very tight timeline, right? So I don't have the motion yet, but I will, just thumbs up or something. How do you feel about that? Does anybody strongly object? Because I'm really torn, but I know that we're going to go beyond midnight for sure. And I don't think that that's fair either. It's not fair to us, because we won't have the time to ask staff the really important questions that we want. We can get tired too. What do you think? Does that sound fair?
Yeah,
I fully support that.
Okay, put your thumbs back up, because I have to count committee members. Okay, that's cheating, Laura. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, you won. We don't have to count anymore. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Staff are working on a motion now, and so we'll continue on, and we'll leave when the last person. So we have Jason, you're first, Jason Burgraff, and then the last person today will be Rosalind Hill. The staff will adjust the list from Marnie Peters to Ed Phillip. You are in the wings for the 20th. And you'll be contacted, so there's no need for you to do anything. in the interim, okay? So everybody voted on that.
Well, the voting.
Yeah, they did. Well, we're going to have a motion, a formal motion, so we'll be recessing to that date. All right, so Jason, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Right, thanks very much. Good afternoon. Thanks for giving me the time to speak. GOBA and its members support this so-called status quo scenario as the appropriate growth management strategy for the city. While we appreciate the hard work that staff have put into their report and their continuing dialogue with GOBA and other stakeholders, our concern is that their recommended plan of increasing intensification from our current 40% to 60% has not been modeled or demonstrated to be achievable. If we approve an intensification rate that is not realistic and then underestimate our land supply needs because of it, then we will not be able to provide the number of homes we need for our projected growth of 400,000 new Ottawa residents by 2046. And this will have a negative impact on housing affordability and choice for all. And it's not just about the number of homes, but the appropriate supply of all types as well. The provincial policy statement requires that our official plan include the provision of an appropriate range and mix of housing options and densities to meet projected market-based and affordable housing needs of the regional market area. This requirement is recognized in staff's analysis, and they have laid out how many single detached, semis, row houses, and apartments that they need to put into existing neighborhoods. The problem, though, is that this hasn't been mapped or modeled to show that it's achievable. Staff are calling on 16,000 new single detached homes to be built within existing communities. Where are they going to go? Is there space for them? Or is there space for the 4,000 semis or 28,000 row houses that are also supposed to go into existing neighborhoods? GOBA has consistently urged for intensification mapping and modeling so that we know what we can accommodate and that we can get community buy-in. But I want to repeat that the provincial policy statement requires that you ensure that there's a range and mix of housing options for residents of Ottawa. The current government of Ontario has made this very clear to us, very clear to the Provincial Home Builders Association and to all municipalities, as particularly those who have seen a dramatic increase in house prices and not like Ottawa. If the city doesn't offer a healthy mix of housing, then it's not doing its job in the responsible provision of housing for residents. And that leads us to why we don't believe that a 60% intensification rate is realistic. All of you know that infill projects often receive opposition from constituents, community groups, and increasingly some elected officials. Our submission details how impediments to intensification have meant a significant shortfall in the number of homes we could have already had within existing communities. First, in the staff report, it's acknowledged that the average rate of intensification increased from 38 to 39% over 7 years from 2011 to 2018, 1%. An additional 1% in 7 years, with increasingly difficult community battles, councillor opposition, OMB, and LPAT appeals. Now staff are calling for an increase of about 5% every 5 years going forward. Earlier today, staff noted that the PPS calls for intensification targets that are reasonable and achievable, and there are risks if we do not achieve our intensification targets. Those risks are housing supply, affordability, and choice. As the stewards and guardians of your communities, do you truly believe that a 60% intensification rate is actually achievable? Secondly, each time we do a new development charge background study, there's a forecast for housing construction inside and outside the Greenbelt. Since the 2009 DC study to now, we've had an annual shortfall of 466 homes per year that were expected to be built inside the Greenbelt but weren't. Since the 2014 DC study, the trend is even worse. We've had a shortfall of 771 homes per year that were not built inside the Greenbelt, and we were expecting them to be. This speaks to our overall inability to densify and the struggle to get to the 40% intensification level where we are now. Given this reality, where is the justification that we can increase to 60%? Proper zoning for low-rise won't be ready until 2023 at the earliest, the middle of the first 5-year period in staff's plan. Intensification yields in staff's recommended scenario, therefore, are already going to be short by over 4,000 homes. There's no evidence that we're likely to achieve the 60% intensification target, and therefore we will fall well short of the 195,000 homes we need for future residents. That's why the quote-unquote status quo scenario, which still calls for a healthy increase in intensification, is the best plan to provide a balance of growth, affordability, and the level and type of intensification that Ottawa neighborhoods want. Thanks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Just have to see if anybody is.
Yeah, we have Jeff and we have Catherine McKinney.
Okay, so Councillor Leeper first, and then I'll see if there's anybody from the committee. No, Councillor Leeper, then Councillor McKinney.
Thanks, and I will try to keep it relatively brief, Chair. Jason, I take the provincial policy statement, and that it comes with explicit instructions on how to read it. And I want to take a look first here at the section of the provincial policy that says, read the entire provincial policy statement. Fair enough. The provincial policy statement is more than a set of individual policies. It is to be read in its entirety, and the relevant policies are to be applied to each situation. When more than one policy is relevant, a decision maker should consider all of the relevant policies to understand how they work together. The language of each policy, including the implementation and interpretation policies, will assist decision makers in understanding how the policies are to be implemented. Some of the clear direction in the provincial policy statement is that we should be avoiding urban sprawl. We should be relying to the greatest extent possible on intensification rather than the addition of new lands. How do you feel that your assertion that we are required to offer as many single-family homes as the market wants fits with how we're supposed to read the entire provincial policy statement as a set of policies that are sometimes in conflict with one another, and which it's our job as council to figure out what is in the public interest?
So I agree completely. You have to take the PPS into account as a whole. We have no trouble understanding that the role that supply has when we talk about various housing types. We have no trouble recognizing that a lack of supply in social housing and supportive housing affects people who need that type of housing, and that we need more of it. We have no trouble recognizing that the supply of rental housing is critical to the price of rents and the availability and the necessity that there's enough rental housing available and how it affects vacancy rents across the city. I don't understand why supply then in the context of private market housing suddenly becomes invalid. We're talking about housing that is for 90% of Ottawans. It's a critical part of the city. It's meeting market demand, keeps people in the city, and it's an important thing to keep in consideration.
But I mean, surely, how do you feel that we have heard from even folks in industry that if a single family home isn't available, that people will choose, rather than longer commutes, they'll choose a semi-detached product that's in the same price range. We heard from the real estate folks that they'll choose a condominium that's in the core. There is a certain level of substitutability. I think the number of trips that are projected to be generated speaks to a few thousand people moving out of the municipal boundary, but it's not going to be most people. Most people who are going to work in Ottawa are going to live in Ottawa. If they can't get a single family home, won't they choose other products?
I wouldn't equate substitutability with choice. People who strive for a single family home and then don't necessarily choose a townhome. They settle for a townhome. Some choose townhomes and some choose to live in various parts of the city. There's no, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a choice in that case. It's always a balance of what I can afford, what are my needs, where I work in the city, where I might have family. There's any number of considerations on ending up what type of house you live in.
Okay, moving on quickly to, you talked about councillor opposition as an impediment to intensification. I'm trying to think of, certainly in my ward, any projects that haven't moved ahead because of councillor opposition.
Well, and we have members who build housing throughout the city, both in suburbia and in infill, some who do both. And there are certainly a number of projects that have gone to council decision where there have been councillors who voted against it. So
that's not the same as council stopping it. Council works by majority.
Very true, but we're trying to set up a policy environment that supports intensification, that encourages intensification, and when there are even individual councillors that oppose it, it makes that process all the more difficult and more expensive.
I disagree. I think that the individual councillor opposition has not proven to be an impediment to intensification. And don't you agree? I mean, the best way to take care of that is through updating our zoning bylaw to reflect the kind of housing that we want to see built.
So we would absolutely love to see the zoning redone. I have easily a dozen infill builders who have spent countless hours on infill 1 and 2, on R4. But let's be honest. I mean, I watched the April 9th PC meeting where there was an update on R4. There was a 12-minute presentation by staff, and then there was 40 minutes of discussion. And, there was a lot of humming and hawing and, well, I don't know, and we'll have to see what, how it comes out. We can couch it in any terms we like, in terms of, the right type of project, or the right size, or fits into character. But those are the impediments that we can't afford to have if we're going to achieve more intensification than where we are now.
I disagree that you need to have unanimous support from councillors to go that way. The GOBA has been running a advertising campaign that is purports to show development patterns. When I took a look at Westboro, what I saw was no development shown where all the development is occurring along Scott Street. A ton of tall towers shown where there's no realistic chance that the people who have built very large, expensive homes overlooking Westboro Beach are going to sell their land, and no intensification at the missing middle scale in the areas where we anticipate that R4 will eventually creep down to. What were your instructions to FOTEN in terms of modeling what intensification might look like? Because it doesn't look realistic to those of us who know the zoning on the ground.
So, I mean, FOTEN can speak to it a little better. I know Miguel is coming up in a few things, so you can speak to any particulars. It is potential development scenarios to be laid out for sure. And the realistic thing is we're trying to help encourage the consideration and the debate about intensification, what it would actually or could potentially look like on the ground. That's the conversation that we haven't had as part of this discussion as of yet, especially if we're going to reach to 60%. And that's the kind of mapping that staff are supposed to be providing. Again, the concern is we choose, or you guys choose 60% now. Then all of a sudden, mapping just like the ones, maybe not in any particular property, but mapping like the ones that we provided are going to come out later. And there's going to be a lot of concern moving forward of, geez, this is not what I was expecting when I supported 60%, or when my counselor supported 60%. I had no idea that this is what it was going to look like.
But when you're talking to residents and encouraging them to phone their counselors in favor of one policy position or another, shouldn't that have been much more comprehensive? You didn't show, Tunney's Pasture, Scott Street, the corner of Parkdale and Scott. You didn't show where the intensification is already planned to go, and which will take much of the pressure off the need to build 20-story towers on Kirchhofer in Westboro Beach.
So, I mean, we did what we could in a very short amount of time to try to push that conversation forward. It's not our job to produce those mappings. We felt forced to do so because that conversation was being ignored.
I think it was a disservice to residents. Chair, thank you.
Well, that's your own opinion, and now we're just going to have, it is 6:35, and we still don't have. Actually, we will go beyond 7 o'clock, so I do have a procedure motion on that. Just stay there, Jason. We're not done yet, okay?
Okay.
Councillor McKenney, Councillor Fleury. Oh, everybody wants to talk to you. Does everyone want to talk to you? No.
Councillor McKenney
And Councillor Fleury, okay. So because we're going to go beyond 7, we need a motion. It's just procedural. Be it resolved that the planning committee approve that the meeting time be extended past 7 p.m. pursuant to subsection 8(1)(c) of Procedure Bylaw 2019-8. Can we have a thumbs up if that's carried?
Okay.
Okay, we have, can you see that, Melody?
Yeah.
Who's voting? Do you need to know?
Thank you, that's fine.
Okay, good. All right, so I know some people are saying now that they would like to come back tomorrow. We do have a couple of conflicts. We have a library board at 5 o'clock, and we have a subcommittee of the Ottawa Police Services. So I'm asking staff to find out if that's all we have. Not that I'm minimizing the library, because I'm not. I don't know what space they take and what space that staff would have. But if that's better for the people that wanted to speak today, then maybe what we do is we actually end earlier this evening, because it'll be till 6 o'clock tomorrow for sure, because we're going to be asking questions of staff. We're going to be looking at the motions, correct? Are we all? Can I just say if you kind of agree with me? Yeah. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
You have 4 of your counselors who are on the library board. Is there a way that we can not have overlap?
Well, if we get done, I mean, the way that we're going at it today, I think if we were to tighten up the questions for sure and tighten up the answers and not talk a lot about, you know, some story from long ago past, and
I hear you.
you know, if we were to do that, I think it's eminently doable.
Okay, I just want to flag that for you. You've got 4 counselors.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I think that we don't go as late then tonight as we were going to, because that's just too much. It just is. Okay. All right. So we've still got staff finding that, and as soon as they have it, I'll come back to you. So right now we're going to Councillor McKinney and then Councillor Fleury. Questions of Jason Berggraf. Go ahead. Can you please make every point not to soliloquize? And I'm not just talking to you, Catherine. I'm talking to everybody. If we could just like get to the point, that'd be helpful. We can get through more people that are waiting. Thank you.
Councillor McKinney, you're muted.
Councillor McKenney, are you? Councillor McKenney. Okay, why don't we go to Councillor Fleury when we are waiting for Councillor McKenney?
Sure.
Councillor Fleury.
Merci, merci les présidents. Thank you, Jason, for the presentation, and thank you for the conversation last week. I wanted to follow up on 2 items. So this is to give a quick summary, but your questions were around ramping up intensification. How do we do it in part of our conversation? And you spoke to where those dwellings were going. And I'm curious to see from an association, what is your thought around if council were to adopt the more aggressive plan, where should those dwellings be going? And more specifically, what are your thoughts around the modeling out of the bungalow belt inside the Greenbelt communities?
I can't, as an association, I can't speak to particular pieces of land that should be upgraded because they have private interests, and that would be picking members over each other. So I can't really comment on such a thing.
Okay, but you did speak to me about the part of your concern was around the lack of modeling.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you had shared with me that the FCA was in line with GOBA on that. So wondering if maybe I'm misphrasing it, but can you further your thought on what's missing in the modeling out that would provide a better understanding of some of those intensification targets?
So it's the actual mapping of the city. You know, and Sheila can certainly correct me in her own deputation, but there hasn't been any layout of what are the nodes, what are the corridors, what are the arterials that are likely to be upzoned from wherever they are now to R4 or to even higher, so that staff will have laid out of where they expect that intensification to go and what type of intensification it could very well be. That is supposed to be part of what's coming in December, but here we are now picking that number, if it's 50% or 60% or whatever the number is, and then we have no idea, to Councillor Leaper's point, of what the actual buildings will be. This is the issue, is there's no anticipation of what it will look like. What's the effect on the ground? How will my ward and my neighborhood change? On a philosophy wise, people can support a 60% intensification. But then when it comes time to turn around and there are going to be tall buildings around transit their way, if there's 4 stories or even more, perhaps very near their homes, we can't achieve the intensification rates, whatever they may be, if the reality of what intensification is going to require on the ground does not match people's perceptions. And my concern is that we have not had enough of that conversation.
Okay, I'll leave it there, but Councillor Elchantier, that'll be a point that I will be raising later, because I believe both the industry and residents are speaking to this issue of modeling.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fleury. Councillor McKenney, are you back?
Thank you. I am back. I don't know what happened there. Hi, Jason. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Listen, I want to talk about the intensification share, and I just want to make sure that I have it clear. So if I'm looking at the annual development report today in 2018, it shows that we achieved an intensification share of 55.2%, right? 2017, we achieved 39.1, and in 2016, we achieved, it was like 45.5 intensification share. So that combined total, and this is going to table 13 of the report, from 2012 to 2016, averaged 51.4%. And isn't 51% of growth through intensification actually the 60% we're looking for? Like, I'm just not seeing what the outrageous intensification target is. I'm seeing that we are already achieving it within the boundary that we have. So I just don't, when you say we have to go from 40 to 60, I go back to, and I don't have it right in front of me, but I go back to the modeling that was done earlier that shows, we actually have to start at 55% and get to 60. We're not starting at 40. We're beyond 40. We're past 50. So I'm going to ask that question of staff as well for clarification. But are you able to circle that square for me?
Yes, I think I can actually. And this is part of the issue of where the goalposts have changed. Back, like you referred, back before Christmas, over the summer, staff were talking about that we had achieved, quote unquote, 50% intensification. And it was being floated that there would be a 60% intensification. So an increase of about 10%. But what staff has had to come and do from this point is say, wait, okay, when we're actually considering intensification, we can't talk about we can't include collective dwellings. In terms of student residences, in terms of old age homes, we can't include vacant land that has plants on it that was greenfield, but hasn't been developed in a phase 4 years previous. So in fact, staff had to take a step back from where they were in December and take out all those numbers to what you see today. That's why achievement, and it's in the staff report, that's why achievement has dropped from that 50% number we were talking about before Christmas to the 40% where we are now.
Okay. You know what? Thank you for that, but and I will raise that with staff, probably offline and back. The other thing too, we keep talking about is the mix of housing and what people want to see. But again, just for clarification purposes, we're talking about the same mix of housing, whether it's going to be in the existing urban boundary or outside of the urban boundary. Is that not correct?
Absolutely, we're just talking about the same numbers. The question is,
Anybody else wants to speak?
No.
is it realistic? Is it realistic to think that we are going to get 16,000 new single-family homes in the urban boundary? Is it realistic to say, we're going to get 4,000 semis, 28,000 town row homes, and that's half of the existing. That's half of the housing types that are supposed to go into the built boundary now. Staff, again, it goes back to the mapping. Staff haven't shown that there is even physical capacity for that within the built boundary, and that's the question.
Last question. So I obviously respectfully disagree with you, but I think we respectfully disagree a lot, and we agree a lot, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Jason, one last question. You talked about us as a city under performing, if you will, not providing enough housing over the last several years. But if we go back to 2003 and what our population projections were for actually this year, 2020, as we did our official, look ahead at 2020 after amalgamation.
Okay.
At that point, we had anticipated that we would be at close to 1.2 million residents at this point. So is that not the reason why we're not building the housing that we need? Like, again, I'm not trying to challenge the population projections this time, but we were off by quite a bit. When we looked at 2020, we were off by almost 200,000. Right,
but that was also an estimate from 17 years ago. The DC study now is 5 years, 6 years at most. So one would expect that our, your estimations are always much closer to the event, and they get worse as they go farther out. So the fact that we haven't gotten, over 700 new homes that we were counting on over the past number of years only goes to show how difficult it is in this city to do intensification.
Or to project. I'll leave it at that.
I have to disagree on that one, I think.
Yeah. So, I'll leave it at that. I know my 5 minutes aren't up, but I'll pass
I think though we have to be, it's nice to have a conversation and stuff like that. You ask some really good questions, but there's some other decisions we have to make now too. So.
Yeah. Well, we all get to ask our questions. Thank you.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. Thanks, Jason.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so I just want to give everybody a heads up. I don't want anybody to move and go anywhere, anybody on the list or anything. So, as we've been speaking, there is a situation tomorrow. We can't go past 5 o'clock because the library board's meeting then, and the library board has, as you said, Councillor Brockington, but that's not the reason. There's just a procedural bylaw that says that you can't meet when a board or a standing committee is meeting. So, here's the option. If we go till 8 o'clock tonight, start back at 9 in the morning, and have everything wrapped up at 5, what do you think the chances are, being very honest about it? You're all going to have to tighten up questions on that. So I'm asking you, because really, do you want to come back a third day? I don't. I really don't. So that's where we are now. I think we'll go to another speaker. So think about it. Everybody could come back to me on the text or whatever. That would be great. Okay. I know most people did say let's do it tomorrow, but then we have the library board that's a fly in the ointment, if you will. Okay. So the next speaker,
John Smith.
John Smith. Hi, John. Where are you? Where'd you go? There you are.
He's coming.
Oh, you're on. There you go.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's great to see you all again, even though it's through a virtual means. I guess it's been about a year or so since I've sort of had my face around City Hall in front of most of you. And as the former director of the Economic Development and Long Range Planning Branch or Services area, I really appreciate the effort of staff in bringing this report to committee. And I wish to commend staff for meeting this important threshold of the official plan review process. Overall, I find the work represented in the report to be reflective of the high caliber of effort that I would expect from staff in examining and bringing forward balanced recommendations for managing growth within the framework of the planning horizon for the new official plan. On that, I wish to extend my congratulations to my former team. So kudos to all of you. Clearly, a key challenge, as noted by staff, and as we've heard from a number of the speakers today, is achieving the increased intensification targets that are reflected by the recommended strategy. And I also appreciate staff noting that additional work will be undertaken over the coming months as policies are developed for the new OP to determine how the additional units identified for the urban area might be accommodated. Amongst some of the ideas to be investigated, such as the 613 units, I would also suggest that staff look at modifying how mid-rise is defined to reflect how these are defined in other jurisdictions. When I look at other cities comparable in size to Ottawa, where they're pushing at high-rise buildings in the 40 to 50-story range, mid-rise buildings tend to be more in the 12 to 15-story range. And I think there's an opportunity for the city to start to look at that in a way to accommodate some of the increased intensification, particularly where they might be in proximity to transit. So that's just one idea I'm putting on the table. And I would expect that along with some of the other challenges that are being faced with respect to meeting intensification, such as the servicing constraints that were talked about earlier, would be the subject of a lot more discussion over the coming months. I would be happy to participate with staff in those as we move forward. In dealing specifically with the report and its recommendations, the key question from my perspective related to the growth management is how we anticipate Ottawa to look and function with a population of 2 and possibly 3 million people. As committee will recall, and as noted by Joe Barrett from Urban Strategies, one of the foundational pieces of work that was undertaken in launching the OP review was the Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 study. That study was a break from past practices and methodology of forecasting and visioning to determining the policy framework through the OP review to one where we began to look at possible or plausible futures through a scenario-based planning exercise where the focus is on identifying known, somewhat known, and possible unknown influences or drivers of change that will impact cities moving forward into the 21st century. The form of study undertaken through Beyond 2036 was focused on directing thought and discussion on what we need to think about and trying to understand what the city might need to function and look with a doubling or tripling of the population beyond the 25-year planning horizon of the new OP. And I was glad to hear Mr. Herwire in his presentation this morning also note that it's important to position this official plan towards setting the course for what future official plan reviews will need to focus on. What is needed to provide for doubling or tripling our population requires a careful consideration, in my view, of form and function. Intensification needs to be part of that, but this can't be the only solution. The staff recommendation acknowledges this, and I agree with the balanced approach. And as noted by Joe and Cindy, that this is in fact a very ambitious framework that we've got before us. But it needs to be done both related to intensification, but also looking at how urban areas grow and the expansion areas. As has been noted by many of the other speakers, a key balancing element that needs to be part of the growth strategy is ensuring that we don't compromise the competitive advantage that Ottawa has enjoyed for many years related to housing affordability. And I think the recommended strategy is moving and recognizing that that's a key thing that we need to keep in mind. In reading through the staff report, however, I note that the focus of the growth management strategies discussed fall into 2 buckets: the no expansion bucket, and then 2 options related to some form of urban expansion. But in looking at those 2 options, the sense I get is that they're focused on continued expansion around the edges, both east, west, and south in an incremental fashion. And when we look at the Beyond 2036 study, there were in fact also 3 options, but the third option was looking at a focused area for growth where a new complete community might be able to be developed as part of Ottawa and with continued intensification both in the urban and suburban areas. My suggestion is that it would be important as staff move forward in developing policies to also further examine what that third possible scenario identified in Beyond 2036 might present in terms of challenges and opportunities to provide for focused growth to meet the needs to accommodate 2 to 3 million people. So again, really looking at positioning this official plan with a much longer view beyond the 25-year planning horizon. The balanced approach recommended by staff, being focused on the 25-year planning horizon, is doing what it's required to do. But again, having listened to a lot of the discussion, I think it's also important that we appreciate what this actually compares to, or what this actually represents. And I think when you start looking at crunching the numbers and looking at this 25-year planning horizon, the balanced approach, what you're really looking at is 3% additional urban area to what we have today to accommodate 40% of the growth. And again, I think that reinforces the comments provided by Urban Strategies that what staff is recommending is very ambitious. And I think we need to be ambitious as a planner, looking at how we need to expand and grow the city. But again, I think the key focus from my perspective is making sure that we position this growth management strategy and the directions in the new official plan in terms of how the city will work and function and look at a population of 2 to 3 million people. And that needs to occur beyond just intensification. And I think not looking at or not including a focused area for urban expansion might be cutting ourselves short in terms of finding the right answer. And I throw out as one example, a city of 2 to 3 million people may require a new sewage treatment facility to accommodate a doubling or tripling of our population. And where such a facility might locate might be a key consideration in terms of how we focus additional growth moving forward beyond the 25-year planning horizon of the official plan. So, Madam Chair, again, I'm not commenting specifically on the details. I think staff did a tremendous job in terms of what they've brought forward to you. I really want to come back to something I was very heavily involved with, which was the Beyond 2036 study, and making sure that this official plan actually takes a look at how we can use this OP to position ourselves in looking at a city of 2 to 3 million people beyond the planning horizon that we're mandated to plan for through official plans. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that committee might have.
That's excellent. Thanks very much. Have you been involved with the process along the way here, John? Like, I mean, have you been part of a sponsor group or anything?
No, I haven't. I've been involved indirectly, just following the process, and I really didn't get myself back into meaningful engagement in the private sector until January, which is when I was given the clean bill of health. So I've been following up on it. A couple of my clients, in fact, have projects and they're very interested in what's going on through the OP review. But I haven't been as directly involved through either sponsors or particular stakeholder interests up to this point in time. I've been doing some work to try to understand sort of the GOBA position, but essentially what I'm presenting to you today is my opinion, and it's reflecting sort of from a carryover of when I was looking after the economic development long-range planning team.
Well, that was at the start of the official plan process.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's pretty important stuff. So we'll have a conversation, members of council, after Councillor Dudas has questions, and then Councillor Menard.
Just a point of clarification, and John, it's wonderful to see you again, by the way. Did you mention that in the Beyond 2036 report that it spoke about a new complete community? And did you actually identify a location for where you were looking to put that?
No, there wasn't a specific location identified, Councillor. It was there were 3, when you looked under the section in Beyond 2036 that's talked about urban form, it talked about 3 broad future scenarios that we potentially could be looking at. One was 100% intensification with no urban expansion. The second one was continued expansion around the edges as we've experienced for the past many decades. And then the third option was, do we start looking at a focused area to accommodate continued growth to achieve sort of a population of the 2 to 3 million that we anticipate we will be looking at within the next century. So it's really in the context of making sure that we're not pigeonholing ourselves into looking at things in a specific way, but keeping as broad as we can, understanding the implications of each of these scenarios and the things that we need to be thinking about. And I guess the point that I'm making is, and I'm glad to hear that Dawn indicated this morning that we are looking to position this official plan to think about what needs to happen after this OP. But the one area that I thought wasn't clearly articulated, and it may very well be that this is something that's going to get looked at over the course of the next few months, but it wasn't clear in the staff report. And I think it's important that we not lose sight of there's another option out there that might, in fact, present answers that we might not be looking at if our focus is continued expansion around the edges in an incremental fashion.
Thank you.
Councillor Menard?
Thanks very much, Chair. John, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
John, where are you working these days?
So I'm working on my own, set up my own firm, and then
I don't know what that has to do with anything, but nice of you to answer.
Yeah, so I'm basically working on my own, and I'm making myself available to those that are interested in pursuing development or various other initiatives.
Okay, fantastic. And then in terms of the discussion we've had here around costs, I take it you're familiar with the Hanson Report?
It's been a while since I looked at the Hanson Report.
Okay. I mean, some of the conclusions from there is just the cost of the municipality in terms of where you build, that there's actually a net benefit to the city when you're building compact intensified communities within the boundary versus building outside of that, and the cost that comes with growth outside of sort of the core. Are you familiar with Edmonton's study of costs to expand?
No, I'm not. But I think the other thing, Councillor, and I think this is why I brought forward the importance of looking at all of the potential options. This is where Ottawa is incredibly unique in terms of the land area that we have. Unlike many other cities where they have no choice but to look at incremental expansion around the edges. If I recall, that's what Hanson would have been more focused on. Whereas if you look at a focused area where you can actually start accommodating the growth needs, and it may very well be that that's not the right answer for Ottawa, but not looking at it, I think, is short-sighted. And I'm not sure that anybody's really fully understood or appreciated what that might look at. And I go back to the example of a sewage treatment plant. I mean, where might that need to locate? I mean, that's one of those big, bold things that needs to happen potentially at some point if our existing sewage treatment facility cannot be sized to accommodate a 2 to 3 million population increase for the city of Ottawa. We have to look somewhere else, and where might that be? And might that influence in terms of what we start looking at in terms of a focused area for growth?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, so before we go any further, folks, I'm going to change some words in this thing and get some of the media are wondering why we didn't plan to go several days anyways, but you never know with these things. That's the answer. So we do take it very seriously, and tomorrow is a day that, other than the library board, and I think Councillor Meehan has to adjust your plans for one of her subcommittees of Ottawa Police Services Board. Thank you for doing that. And the library board starts at 5. I have no idea whether we will get everything done tomorrow. The way we're going at 4 delegations an hour, chances are not. But let's plan to do that, since it seems from the outreach that I did that the joint committee members would prefer to go tomorrow. And we'll start at 9 o'clock. And we'll stay, because we are doing this virtually, so this is actually a benefit, because the library board members will be able to switch seamlessly to the library board meeting. Correct? All right. So we'll go to, say, 4:45 tomorrow. Okay. And so the motion that we have is And before I do, I want to say how incredibly thankful I am to the clerk's office and Melody Duffany and Caitlin Salter McDonald and also Caitlin Corcoran, who are doing their best to keep us where we need to be and inform people that are now not going to speak today. Hopefully they'll be available for tomorrow. So the motion is be it further resolved that following the final delegation for the day, that's today, the meeting be recessed to Tuesday, May the 12th at 9 a.m. To continue hearing the remaining public delegations that had signed up prior to the start of the meeting. So we'll be taking no new delegations. I think that we should give flexibility to the people left on the list to move around if they need to be, because they weren't planning on coming tomorrow, but they are the balance of the list. And those people that had signed up as of 9 o'clock this morning and had not yet had the opportunity to speak in the order in which they have signed up, unless, like I said, somebody says, you know what, I can't do it till 2 in the afternoon. I think we have to be flexible because it's a surprise to them. And we want to hear from the people that want to speak to us. Followed by committee's consideration and debate of the new official plan growth management strategy support report. So anyone have any questions or is that carried?
Carried.
Carried?
Carried.
Chair, do you want to do a roll call on that one just for the minutes, please?
Okay. So this is on recessing until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Okay, Councillor Dudas?
I agree.
Councillor Shirelli? Councillor Tierney?
Yes.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Oh, yes, he says. Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse? Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Councillor Meehan?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
Yes.
Vice Chair Gower?
Yes.
Chair Al Shantiri?
Yes.
And myself, that's yes. So we'll be right back at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. And thanks again to our staff who are going to make every effort they can to, get in touch with everybody. So our next so now let's talk about tonight. I did say 9 o'clock. I think we're going to change that to 8 o'clock since we're coming back. I think that that's only humane, to tell you the truth. Okay, we agree with that? Thumbs up?
Seems everybody.
Everybody's good. Good. What a team. Okay, Wendell Cox, Frontier Center for Public Policy, followed by Sheila Perry. Sheila, I saw you there somewhere. And then Ross Meredith, the chair of the Byward Market Committee on the Capital 2020 Task Force, and then Miguel Tremblay. And you know what? Let me just look at that. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, if we get the when that's over, that's it. So that means Christina Bouchard. John DeVry has John DeVry may want to come back now that he may have. I think you should include him in the email list. Okay, so Christina Bouchard on down on that list. To everybody from number 46 to 112 or 109 actually. 109. You will be in that order or as close to we can get it tomorrow morning. So thank you very much. And now we'll go to, where are you, Wendell? Wendell Cox. Thank you. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a senior fellow with the Frontier Public Policy Center for Public Policy, national think tank headquartered in Winnipeg, an organization dedicated to economic growth and opportunity. I'm author of a paper a couple of years ago, actually co-author of a paper called Canada's Middle Income Housing Affordability Crisis. I also am co-author of the Demography International Housing Affordability Survey, which is in its 16th year and has covered Ottawa in every year since it started, and principal of my own consulting firm, Demography, in St. Louis. We did a report commissioned by GOBA. They asked us to look at housing affordability in Ottawa since our report on Canadian housing affordability, and also to look at urban containment policy, which obviously includes your urban boundary expansion and things like intensification and so on. First, to talk very quickly about housing affordability in Ottawa. Between 2000 and 2015, house prices increased about 4 times the average increase in incomes. In addition to that, we have seen the house prices in the CMA, which of course includes Gatineau, go from 2.9, that is a price to income multiple of 2.9 to 4.1 in our 16 years. So that's 1.2 years of additional income needed to buy a house. And that would be to buy any house, including an owned apartment. And then who knows what's going to happen with COVID at this point, but in the last 6 months, that is August through February, house prices rose 15% in Ottawa, in the city of Ottawa. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the Demography Housing Affordability Survey because it has a lot of information that I think you should be aware of, because we cover 9 nations, 92 major metropolitan areas, and 300 overall. We look at the price to income ratio, which we call the median multiple, and that is the median house price divided by the median household income. And we consider anything at 3 or below affordable. That's where virtually all markets except for Sydney and Vancouver in Australia, the United States, Canada, and New Zealand were under in 1990. The point is that since that time, housing affordability has worsened very substantially in a lot of places, and virtually all of the major metropolitan areas where there is severe housing unaffordability, there are urban growth boundaries and intensification. Now, at the same time, I'm not suggesting that you have reached the kind of lack of affordability these places have. Vancouver, Toronto, Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, London, San Francisco, Portland, and many others. To give you an idea, the median multiple, again, this is the price to income ratio, rose from 5.3 to 11.9 in Vancouver over the last 16 years. In Toronto, from 3.9 to 8.6. You're doing better than this, but our concern is that you understand the risk of not leaving enough room in the urban boundary to keep the prices down and keep things affordable. So I'll finish up very quickly with a resume of the consequences of urban growth boundaries that don't provide enough housing to keep a competitive market in land. Obviously, it makes land more expensive. Excuse me. It hurts lower income households. It hurts low income first home buyers and so on. One thing that is often not recognized by people is it also increases poverty. And the reason it increases poverty by virtue of the fact that as housing costs go up, more households are pushed into core housing need and cannot afford, say, 30% of their income in housing. And again, you in Ottawa, like, by the way, just about everywhere else in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States, have waiting lists for low-income housing, assisted housing. That's a real problem. It also increases, urban containment also increases inequality. That is, I should say, let me correct that, severe housing restrictions, constraints on new supply, increase inequality according to an economic paper for the Bank for International Settlements, Gianni LaCava. One sentence to close it out. You need to have an urban expansion area large enough to keep house prices under control. That is, you do not want housing costs to increase faster than incomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
We got a question from Councillor McKenney.
Councillor McKenney?
Yeah.
Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. Listen, I have a question that I've been meaning to ask all day and haven't done so. So it's coming your way. If we talk about affordability, and what nobody has really answered yet is if what we're thinking is, you know what, we go a little bit further out and things will become more affordable because there'll be more land supply and land will decrease. What about what happens then when you take into account travel, transportation, the need for cars, 1 or 2 cars, to get yourself around. What do you take that into account in terms of affordability?
Well, not certain. No, no. Affordability is a simple relationship of house price to household incomes. And by the way, now I don't have data on Canada with respect to this, but to give you an idea, in the United States, where our Bureau of Commerce does a real good job of doing cost of living by cities, and what you find is 88% of the difference between the expensive cities, like the ones on the coast with urban containment policies, and the ones where it's more normal, 88% of the difference is housing costs. So you know, and with gasoline dropping in price and housing going up, continuing, I don't think it's that big of a deal.
So you don't believe so just to be clear, so when I think about myself, for example, I live in the urban core and I also have a car. My most expensive part of living is my housing, obviously, my mortgage, my insurance, everything else. Second is owning a vehicle. There's no doubt transportation, you know, probably a bit better off than someone who maybe has to drive all the time, but I still probably spend $1,000 a month for, you know, own a car and insurance, gas, everything else. So are you suggesting then that the use of an automobile does not increase that unaffordability to a point where you have to take that into account, or do you think that it is worth owning an automobile to get around the city?
No, I'm not making any statement about the automobile. I'm making a statement about housing affordability, and I think you need to look. I would suggest that be looked at separately. And a household that's making a decision about where to live, whether in an intensified high-rise or ground-oriented house versus living in the suburbs in a detached house, they can make that decision. They do the same kind of economic calculation you should. And my own view, forgive me for being personal about this, but my own view is that really is up to the household.
But so is where you're going to live and how you're living and what type of you know, dwelling you're going to live in. So, you know, those are all things that are kind of up for debate today. So, okay, so just so we're clear, you don't think that having to own a vehicle puts you at a disadvantage in terms of affordability? Just
well, that's a much, you know, after spending 3 terms on the Los Angeles County Transportation Commission, I can tell you that we could talk about this all night. That's a much discussion, and I would not want to have my views on automobiles or anything like that enter into this discussion. I'm talking about housing affordability.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the list?
No.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Cox.
Thank you.
I'm kind of concerned about at least two of the next ones. Sheila's up next. Sheila Perry, President, Federation of Citizens Associations of Ottawa. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Hi, Sheila.
Hi.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. There we go. Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting day and some pretty amazing speakers with a lot of great backgrounds. My name is Sheila Perry. I'm president of the Federation of Citizens Association, and we've been deeply involved in this. And the purpose of this presentation is to highlight some of our issues. First of all, are you getting feedback? Sorry. You can hear?
We can hear you.
Yeah, great. Okay. So we're very pleased to be active participants in this discussion. We're really grateful to the staff for their passion and amazing outreach to everyone. We're volunteers in our community associations and have done a lot of partner work with groups such as People's Official Plan Group, Ecology Ottawa, Green Space Alliance, Cowie, Just Food, etc., and cafes. We realize and first of all want to compliment the city on the Ottawa climate emergency and housing affordability leadership there. But given our times and the troubling times of COVID, we realize the landscape is really changing on this and the challenge of many long-term unknowns, tough economic decisions, and of course the fiscal challenges that go ahead. And that's not to say that personal choices will be impacted, and certainly the impacts on the city planning and business operations of the future. So I'd like to make some comments about the growth strategy options presented and also some recommendations. And we could just follow the slides. I believe you have those, Melody?
No, sorry.
Oh dear. Okay. Thought they'd been submitted. Anyway.
Sheila, how about, since we're, luckily coming back tomorrow, how about send them to us overnight? We'll have a look at them.
Sure.
Okay.
Do you want me to just go ahead, or we'll hold
go
off?
ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, because.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you very much. So we're all about neighborhoods matter.
Unless Sheila, unless you want to come back tomorrow with your slides.
I think it'd be more meaningful for everybody to see the slides.
Then we're going to stop right now, because I'm going to tell you, I know that people are going to want to ask you questions.
Okay.
Including me. So, it just doesn't make sense.
All right. So tomorrow at 9, or how do we do this?
Yeah, no fun, eh? Yeah.
We're not sure.
We're not sure that you'll be. I'll put you. Well, no, she'll be the first one if we come back. So, all right.
If that's all right with you.
We're going to tighten it up more tomorrow. We're doing way more than 4 an hour for sure. We're not going to, we'll be fine. But a lot of people will want to ask you questions, as is the case with Miguel Tremblay, I think. I'm just thinking that because I've heard his name come up quite a few times now. All right. So Sheila, we're going to recess you until tomorrow.
I'm very appreciative of that, and I thought
Melody, do you want her to send you her submission?
Yeah, I'll check. It may be there.
Maybe you sent it.
last
You know
minute.
what? You know what, Sheila? I think that you sent it after the deadline on. I think I saw it on the weekend, because Melody and I were working all weekend. I think I did see it, but there were rules. There had to be rules, right, in order for us to be able to manage today. So they're all going to be they're all going to be put together for. All the submissions will be there between now and even people writing in, after we're finished the committee members meetings, they'll be part of the record too for council. And so, but right now, we'll see you back here tomorrow morning. Okay.
All right. Thank you. We did send in the letter with the PowerPoint at the same time on Friday.
Yeah. Just send it.
Possible to have it, Sheila.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So Ross Meredith, are you there?
I am. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Ross.
Great. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for running late today. I hope you fit dinner in somewhere through your presentations. I'm representing both Capital 2020 as a founding member and also the general manager of the Western Ottawa. So that's my day job. I'm here to write today to speak in support of the official plan, the status quo version, as it is my desire and hope that it will provide a clear understanding on how and what the future development of Ottawa will look like over the next few decades. This endorsement is not meant to pick sides and to be in favor of a certain type of development or against others, but on the contrary, it's intended to provide a greater amount of understanding to homeowners and to home purchasers of what their neighborhoods may look like today and in the future developments for their city. Adopting this official plan, along with updated zoning bylaws, I believe will paint a clearer, more defined picture of what Ottawa and its neighborhoods will look like going forward, and rely less on the implementation of what's often talked about, spot zoning and isolated planning committing decisions. These past practices, in my opinion, have caused divisions amongst neighbors and fractured neighborhoods. The adoption of the official plan with zoning updates should help provide greater clarity and reduce the uncertainty of how and what a development is permitted to look like. As we think about Ottawa in the next 20 to 30 years, we see the potential for a dynamic, diverse, energized, healthy city. And today we are certainly partway there, as I'm sure we'll all acknowledge how lucky we are for the beauty and quality of life in Ottawa and the National Capital Region. However, it is our jobs and a major responsibility of ours to our next and future residents of Ottawa to set us up for success. This includes the establishment of well-planned, sustainable neighborhoods with diverse housing choices, both in price and style of living. We need to think of the city as a whole, not individual wards, and find the correct path for the city to grow to a couple of million people over the next few decades. The status quo version, with a modest increase in the city limits, I believe meets that vision. Finally, I wanted to add a piece about affordable housing. I am blessed with working with and leading 350 amazing associates in my day job every day. Many are first-generation Canadians, raising wonderful families of future doctors, teachers, tradespeople, and service workers for our future city's needs. Part of their attraction to Ottawa is the chance for these associates to save some money and buy their first home, what many of us call the Canadian dream. We have an obligation to ensure that there is continued supply of affordable housing for them to purchase or rent. I believe this official plan with the amendments should support continued development, not just in established exclusive neighborhoods like the Glebe and Westboro, but also in more affordable future areas that will allow everyone an option for sustainable, safe, clean, and diverse housing choices. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Ross. Really good presentation. Appreciate it.
No question.
I don't see any questions, so we're going to go on to Miguel Tremblay. Is Miguel there? I'm happy to have Miguel tomorrow because I think you're going to have a lot of questions.
He is here.
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Can you see me?
I don't know.
Not
I've
yet.
got something in the way here. So.
Put your camera on so we can see you.
Oh, no, yeah.
No,
No, it doesn't matter. We don't
Okay.
really need to see you.
Okay, fair enough. Well, do you want me to proceed or?
Pardon?
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Harder and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity, and in particular, I wanted to attend here with you if I could, in large part because FOTEN was hired by GOBA to prepare some of the massing and mapping drawings to help articulate the implementation of the official plan policies. This was an attempt to illustrate how communities within the Ottawa Greenbelt may need to intensify and change over time to meet some of these intensification targets. The mapping and massing drawings that we considered, we actually modeled out the 60% intensification scenario in the urban area. We thought because it was a middle ground in the staff report and maybe best suited to articulate what the impacts would be to these communities. I can speak to a little bit of the process that we went through, and I did have the benefit of hearing some of the questions to Jason from GOBA. So I'll try to anticipate a little bit of that. But what we did is we selected 7 wards, and we tried to be kind of inclusive. We targeted both inner and outer urban wards, recognizing that they're not all the same. They're not all characterized by the same level of transit, for instance, or even marketability. But we thought if we selected a few of the wards that others can see themselves in, it would probably achieve the objectives, because recognize that we only had a certain amount of time and a certain amount of resources to do this. It was impractical to map out, for instance, the entire city as would have been desired by GOBA. And it was probably unnecessary as well, because what we did is we approached it with a kind of a case study approach. And I heard Councillor Leeper's comments, but really what we wanted to do was look at each ward, assign a general distribution of densities along transit priority corridors in proximity to transit stations, in areas that already have, for instance, secondary plans that already support high rise, and then pick some case studies. So yes, we didn't model the area along Scott Street. We chose the area in Kitchissippi along Dominion Station to show how communities over time will intensify. To be very clear, FOTEN is a planning and design firm, and we actually do the lion's share of our work in urban wards. A lot of the work we do is actually related to intensification projects, which makes us very well suited, I think, to carry out this work and maybe even offer some comments about the levels of intensification. But I want to be extremely clear that FOTEN supports the level of intensification shown on these drawings. It wasn't meant to discourage intensification, but rather to inform the discussion so everybody actually, maybe for the first time, really understands what it means to say 40%, 60%, 100% intensification. So we tried to rely very heavily on direction from the official plan, secondary plans and CDPs, even urban design guidelines in terms of tower separations. So everything that we've shown here is heavily rooted in those existing policy documents in terms of building heights, tower locations, tower separation, building footprints, podiums, all of those things. Is it a detailed analysis of every property, and did we factor in the right transition to the low-rise neighborhood? No. It was intended to be broad strokes so that people get a sense of what those percentages mean. Again, that we also recognize that intensification right at the transit station, the tall 900 Albert 65-story tower, is usually not the issue. Those actually communities have a good sense of that being appropriate. It was more trying to take a reasonable approach to those transitions within the 400 and 600 meter range of transit stations to try to show some of that low-rise product, some of the wood frame things that product that Royce talked about earlier today about being an important contributor to some of the city's intensification policies. But we do have reservations as to how easily we'll be able to achieve these levels of intensification, given still there's a lot of community discomfort and am I done?
Yeah. 5
so anyways,
seconds.
in response,
don't waste a second.
In response to those frictions and a recognition that this level of intensification will be pretty hard to achieve, we are recommending a proportionate urban boundary expansion to supplement, so that we're not putting too much pressure on these communities to accommodate that low rise and mid rise product, and try to find some sort of balance, because some of the issues of the PPS and that have been already flushed out, but about providing a range of housing products, not just intensification, to provide that aspect of choice within a community. And I also have some discomfort or some skepticism that some of that ground-oriented product will be able to be comfortably transferred over to the built-up areas. And the reason I say that is, we do a lot of work, a lot of due diligence for clients. Given the price of land and the proximity to transit and all sorts of other considerations, most of what we've been doing in the last 10 years is really characterized by mid and high-rise buildings in proximity to transit, rather than that ground-oriented product in proximity to transit. We are doing that kind of product in other locations, and I think that's an important contribution to these intensification targets. But I don't think we're going to be able to achieve everything we want in the absence of these taller buildings. So I don't know if I want to leave it at that and entertain questions, or.
Sure, sounds good. Councillor Leeper is first on the list, I believe.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Miguel. And it was, I'm curious, GOBA used the modeling that FOTEN did to talk to people, I think, to scare people, to say, this is what your neighborhood could become if the boundary is not expanded. Did you read any of the social media or other reaction to the campaign?
I did. I mean, full disclosure, I don't have a Facebook account and I'm not on Twitter, but
oh my goodness.
Well, but
are you even here?
Sorry?
Are you even here?
I am, and I do have an Instagram account, and I'm sure everybody from my office is enjoying your comments. But at the same time, we recognize that it's caused a fair amount of discomfort in existing communities, but I think it is an important part of the discussion. I think, you know, at different times, there's been delegations advocating for 100% intensification. I think people need to fully understand what that means. Again, my early comments were FOTEN is comfortable with this level of intensification. It's strategically located at transit stations and transit corridors. And I think that all of these can be integrated well. I've had this discussion with several councillors before that my feeling is if you want to protect the inside area of a neighborhood, you direct growth to where it's best suited. You direct it to those areas of transit priority corridors. You put it on Rideau Street. You put it on Woodruff and Carling to protect those inside areas that, you know, communities are very uncomfortable with change. But the levels of intensification that we're talking about, and we did try to show that 4- and 6-story wood frame product, is that those areas will be impacted. And I think you're probably zeroing in a little bit, Councillor Leeper, on Roosevelt. And you saw what we did for Roosevelt, but recall, if you will, that, you know, FOTEN recently with domicile proposed a 6-story building transitioning down to a 4-story building. In that case, we did not enjoy councillor support. We didn't even get the recommendation we were seeking at committee, but it was altered at council, and there was 6 LPAT appeals for a 28-unit building, 1 property removed from a traditional main street and 250 meters to a transit station. So, and I recall the questions that were put to Jason, but it is very hard to achieve these levels of intensification. And there is a considerable amount of community discomfort. That's not to say that the discomfort is illegitimate. They're focused on issues of traffic, shadowing, building height, density, lack of soft services to support the new residents. Those are all very important, very legitimate concerns, but it does slow down the process and the viability of reaching these intensification targets.
But isn't, Miguel, isn't the problem something that we heard from Angela Herzog-Kellogg earlier today? Isn't the problem that the reaction is against the lack of zoning that allows for this kind of intensification? Every single one of these is a spot rezoning. And it's a roll of the dice how it's going to turn out. Brian, your colleague, was at my meeting the other night for the 9-story at Richmond and Churchill, and you know, I have been getting almost uniformly positive response to that building because we talk to people a lot about, okay, here's the planning context in which this is going to occur. People know that we have other buildings along; they've come to expect it. We need to set out the expectations, don't we, around what that intensification is going to look like in order to mitigate some of that community pushback.
I agree. And I often find, and I've said this before, the city goes ahead and they approve a set of policies and then they walk away from them. And then it becomes the developer's burden, with their planning consultants in my case, to sell the city's vision for intensification. And then oftentimes the response in those meetings is, well, we have a proposal in front of us, we're required to evaluate it. Well, that's not the right answer. The right answer is, we've made a commitment to intensification. This is how our city is going to grow. And I think the city's on the right path in this case because they're intending to implement some of the zoning that is going to support these intensification efforts. Certainly, I support that. I support the city's R4 initiatives. But I also recognize that there is no possible way that the city will get all of the zoning right and that it will marry up perfectly with the policy direction. And there will always be needs to change secondary plans, to change CDPs, to reassess zoning and rezone properties for different product. As an example, the city just came up with 613. 613 doesn't have a zoning category, and it'll have to be tailored, right? Development, we heard on numerous occasions, including Green Space Alliance, that we're going to have to find innovative product to meet some of these intensification objectives and marry up with some of these policies. Well, those are going to require zoning changes, and there's always going to be a need to entertain these changes in policy and regulatory documents. And my point is, it's not an easy process. Believe me, I love my job. I love everything I do. But I recognize that sometimes it's not very easy to achieve these intensification objectives.
They're not easy, but they're worth pursuing. Obviously, we're getting close to the end here. I apologize, Chair, but you showed a number of different neighborhoods with a number of different intensification scenarios. Do you have some feeling as to how much additional intensification in neighborhoods that you haven't shown would be required? Because obviously the modeling that you showed didn't put the full 180,000 units in there. I can't remember how many you modeled, like 6 or 7 of them.
Well, so we chose certain case studies, again, because I think a lot of these could be mirrored. If you look closely at the modeling, and I obviously can't put it up on the screen, but each ward started off with an analysis of nodes and corridors. And you could, to some degree, although not all nodes and corridors are created equal, you could assign a comparable amount of density and height to those corridors within each ward. But each ward is different as well. And for instance, Southgate, Alta Vista, even Capital Ward, like Capital Ward, the areas of the case study that we focused on was on Bronson and Carling, which is not defined by a transit station because it's outside of the area of the transit station, but it is defined by the intersection of an arterial main street and a transit priority corridor, which made it a very good candidate node for greater height and density. That one was actually pretty easy because a lot of what we showed at that intersection are existing applications or existing development proposals, or well, I guess I might be tipping my hand into some proposals that are coming down the road. So, you know, the short answer is probably a proportionate amount within each of your wards at these transit stations. Is that
would accomplish our intensification goals?
The 60? Well, no, I don't think
in a no expansion scenario.
Sorry?
In a no expansion scenario.
This was modeled at 60%, but the reality is you're not going to achieve those levels of intensification. And those levels of intensification assume a lot more low-rise product that we haven't shown at all.
Yeah, they're on the same page there. Chair, I'm sure that we could probably go on for hours like this. It sounds like a Westboro development meeting at the end of it. Miguel, thank you.
Without Fiona.
Without Fiona, exactly.
Don't tell her. Okay, so thank you, Miguel. I don't see anybody else, so thanks for coming out.
So before we turn the meeting, we need, there's a motion, 2 motions from Councillor Moffat, on probably 1 motion and 1 direction. Councillor Moffat, why don't we turn it to you?
Let's just make sure we don't have anybody waiting on the line. Melody, have you cleared everybody else out that were potential speakers?
Not cleared out, but if that's your direction to end there, we can.
I think I said that earlier. Yeah, so Sheila Perry is going to be first tomorrow morning, followed by Christina Bouchard, followed by Susan Sandemont, and maybe Ian Lee. Anyway, we may hear from some of these people that they need to move things around, and these are the people that are going to speak. If we have to move it around, we have to move it around.
So can we have Councillor Moffat? Councillor Moffat, are you?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, or should I turn my?
No, we can hear you.
Fine. Okay.
Actually,
I'll just turn my video off just in case. All right, so I have 2 motions I'd like to put forward. They kind of started as directions, but they evolved into motions. One's on intensification and one involves transit-oriented developments. So the first one, whereas intensification percentage goals will be discussed when the official plan is presented in the 4th quarter of 2020, and whereas the challenge is that community support is often dependent on the type of intensification proposed, i.e. low rise, missing middle, etc. And whereas staff have started to identify opportunities within the 613 flats and the new R4 zoning, and whereas in an effort to be more transparent to the community, about what tools the city will use to reach the intensification goal in the new official plan. Therefore, be it resolved that planning, infrastructure, and development staff, economic development staff, be directed to, when the official plan is presented in Q4 2020, include in their report on a conceptual basis the toolkit that will help the city reach its intensification goals. For clarity, the report is not expected to present the details, but general trends such as new R4 zones on interior roadways, permit semi-detached in R1 zones as some specific potential examples. So the intent there is just to get a better picture for everyone across the city as to what exactly we're talking about. So just it's exactly what it says, conceptualizing intensification. And the second motion feeds into some discussions leading up to today and that have happened already today about development near transit stations. So whereas a significant investment has been made in Ottawa's rapid transit system, and whereas intensification along our rapid transit network is a potential key public policy of our new official plan, and whereas the city may own lands in the vicinity of transit stations and own air rights in similar locations, whereas it may not achieve City Council's public policy goals to simply dispose of these types of properties, and whereas a transparent competitive process for city lands could spur development consistent with City Council's transit goals and achieve our public policy goals for services like affordable housing. Therefore, be it resolved that in order to encourage and support development at our transit stations and along the transit corridor, staff be directed to advise the appropriate standing committee, likely FEDCO, and council how complex it would be to change the current city land disposal policies to create a competitive process for city-owned lands and air rights at rapid transit stations and along the rapid transit network that would offer city-owned land at nominal costs in exchange for tangible public benefits, such as long-term affordable rental housing that equals or exceeds the value of the lands or air rights. So that one's pretty explanatory.
So Councillor Moffat, is this one, the last one, is that a direction or you want it to be a motion?
No, so it's probably just easier just to keep them both as motions.
So
might as well vote on. We may as well vote on them when the time comes. I know it says direction on there, but they're framed as a motion, and I think substantively they should be considered as motions probably.
I would like to see them as a motion, so we need to change the staff direction to move by Councillor Moffat. I see the clerk agreeing, so I guess we'll make the changes before we start debating whenever we do get to the debate. All right. Thank you, Councillor Moffat. I guess with that, we're gonna say thank you to our staff for putting up with us, trying to find dates suitable for everyone to do the rest of the meeting. So we'll see all of you tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we'll go from there and we'll see how much we can accomplish tomorrow. And then by the end of the day tomorrow, we'll have a direction where we reconvene again if we don't finish tomorrow. You have a question, Councillor Leeper? You have to unmute.
Yep. Can I just ask Melody to distribute those two motions when they're available, please?
Yeah, I will send out new Zoom details this evening for the meeting tomorrow, along with the package of motions.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Melody, can you and Caitlin bring more people in, because you know, this is a way more than what you were planning for, and we have 15 items on planning committee for Thursday, plus agenda clearing after that. You know, I just think there's a lot of other things that have to be done, and I think you have to be focused on this. So I would just ask if that could happen to help you.
I will talk with Caitlin.
I don't think, you know, I mean, there's only so much, and I know how much you worked on the weekend. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So we are recessed until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good evening, everyone.
Night.
Good night.